Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Machette, and today is the Astrology Star Sisters, and we're doing planet stationing February 2026. And my guest is Madam Simon, fellow astrologer, friend, and colleague. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Liz.
It's good to see you back.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
Madam Simon is an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, and visionary artist. Her website is iconalchemy.com. I'm Elizabeth Liz Machette, astrologer, author, intuitive, and tarot reader, and my website is alightpath.com. So today we're talking about planets stationing this month, and we have retrograde and direct motion. On the 3rd, we have Uranus stations direct in Taurus, Hygeia stations direct in Gemini on the 13th. And on the 25th, we have Mercury stations retrograde in Pisces. So we're going to start off with Uranus because that happens first in the month on February 3rd at 27 degrees of Taurus and 28 minutes at 6:33 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and 9:33 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you want to start leading us through some background on Uranus?
Sure. So, Uranus is the only one of the major planets who is not named for a Roman god. He's named for the Greek god of the sky, Uranos. Uranus's orbit is 84 years, so he spends about 7 years in a sign. And he's the modern ruler of Aquarius, which is traditionally ruled by Saturn. So you will hear some of us who are traditionalists say that he is a transcendental ruler, or that he has an affinity for the sign, even if we don't acknowledge him as ruler. Uranus is an ice giant with 13 rings and spins sideways, which really emphasizes the character of Uranus, that he's the great rebel, associated with sudden change, creative expression, freedom, eccentricity, originality, independence, revolution, invention, the spark of genius, the unexpected, liberation, and breakdown. Okay, breakdown or breakthrough, right? Some of the cautions are destruction, disruption, extremism, impatience, boredom, restlessness, detachment, unpredictability. I'd like to add a couple of things about Uranus in here. One of the things that I have noticed is that depending upon what other planets are involved in an Uranus transit, we can see an emphasis on technological concerns, and in particular electricity. And so some hard Uranus transits will sometimes involve electrical issues or IT issues, right? Information technology issues. And also, I personally notice that when we see the moon in hard aspect with Uranus, we can see increased tendencies toward insomnia.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So here's the chart for Uranus station direct on February 3rd at 27 degrees Taurus and 28 minutes. And there's an arrow at the top of the chart pointing to Uranus, and Uranus is in the 10th house of the chart for the Seattle area and anywhere on the west coast of the United States. So the aspects that Uranus is making, it conjoins Sedna, sextile Saturn and Neptune, square Mercury and Venus, and sesquiquadrate Juno. So where would you like to start, Simon?
Well, the first thing I'd really like to start with is just that, every time we're dealing with a planetary station, the themes of the planet are going to be more emphasized, right? So regardless of what the aspects are that are going on, it just Uranus stuff is going to loom large, right? Um, and so, um, because Uranus is a disruptive kind of force, that's its nature, um, then we may feel this on kind of a more jarring level than we might with some other planetary stations. Okay. And that's not, I'm not saying that to try to scare you. I'm instead saying that because um, when we're experiencing this kind of a station, we want to recognize that, oh, or do things seem to be going haywire around me? Maybe it has something to do with the station, and that actually, to me, decreases fear and distress around it because now we have, at least something of an explanation, right? Okay. So, this Uranus station is, it's conjoining Sedna by degree, but note that this is a cross sign conjunction. Okay. Um, and so we might not normally think of that as like, pulling in so much Sedna influence, except that Sedna is also interacting with um, Neptune and Saturn here, right? Um, uh, Sedna is part of this sextile with Saturn and Neptune and is actually fairly tightly sextile with Neptune. Okay. And so what we've actually got is some of what can be referred to as translation of light. Okay. Where um, when you have multiple planets that are close to each other, they pull in the influence of whatever planet they're going to have that more exact um, uh, interaction with, and then they're going to spread it out to their fellows, right? They're going to share it with their buddies, like, oh, hey, I got this message from this guy over here. You're right over here. You can't really see this buddy of mine as clearly as I can, but I'm telling you what he has to say, or in this case, what she has to say. Sedna is a trans-Neptunian object that is named for an Inuit goddess who is associated with sea creatures, but also with this kind of journey from victimization to power. Okay. Um, her story is one of somewhat abject victimization. She's, meant to be married off to somebody she doesn't really want to be married off to. And then depending upon which version of the story you hear, her father and brother are either taking her to her husband or taking her from her husband. But in either case, a big storm rises up and they're out on the sea in a canoe. And as the weather gets more fierce, the father and brother decide that, she is too much of a burden. She's adding to the weight of the canoe, and they throw her overboard. And when she grabs onto the edge of the canoe to try to, save herself from drowning, they chop off her fingers. Okay. But from her fingers come the sea creatures that the Inuit depend on. And so she becomes this kind of undersea deity who needs to be respected and propitiated, in order to make sure that your people can still stay fed. Okay. So she goes from a space of abject victimhood to being this fairly powerful figure with this power over life and death, effectively, because if you don't have the creatures you depend on for food, you don't live. Okay. So Sedna within this context then is getting this kind of electric jolt almost, right? Through Uranus. And at the same time, that is shaping our larger vision through Neptune, our spiritual leanings, our sympathies, okay, our compassion for others. We can see with this sextile this sudden awareness of where people have been victimized. Okay. And then, Neptune is translating that over to Saturn, right? And Saturn, in turn, is about, okay, well, how are we shaping our reality? What are the structures that we wish to set in place, the systems that we wish to set in place? And all of that is especially important right now because Saturn is traditional ruler of Aquarius, and Uranus, as this modern or transcendental ruler of Aquarius, has a far more tight relationship with Saturn there, and they are both governing the Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Mars, and Vesta, and Pluto. Okay, there is this big old stellium going on in Aquarius, and so a whole bunch of stuff, including, all three personal planets, right? So things that touch us closely are being affected by these larger transpersonal forces that we see with these outer planets in cahoots along with this trans-Neptunian object. Okay. So there's that. And the thing is that the Uranus station is in this square with Mercury and Venus. And so that is direct disruptive, conflict with how are we thinking, how are we speaking, and how are we connecting with others. And of course we've got Mercury and Venus have recently had a conjunction. They are still in orb of conjunction. And again, Venus is translating the light of Mercury to the sun, right? Who in turn is translating some of that over to Vesta, who in turn is translating that to Mars. They're just kind of going on down the line. Okay. So when Mercury and Venus are hanging out together like they are now, then our thought and communication are more likely to be socially conscious, especially in a highly socially conscious sign like Aquarius, one that is concerned with the well-being of the group more than individuals, okay, of society as a whole. Aquarius has sort of utopian ideals, right? But can also, because Saturn is the traditional ruler, it can get kind of, stodgy and stick in the mud. It can be very stubborn, right? Aquarius is an air sign, so it's concerned with thought and communication, but also it's a fixed sign, so it is thought and communication that have solidified into knowledge, systems of knowledge, rules, how we conduct ourselves in society. Okay, the social norms we see here. And at the same time, what we also see are the iconoclasts who buck the social norms. They've, got a deep understanding of what the rules of society are, right? Enough to break them. Okay. Enough to very effectively break them. Because it's harder to effectively break the rules if you don't know what they are, right? Okay. So we see, like, this sign in particular, we really see that dichotomy between traditional rulership and modern rulership, and they both play a part in how the sign works, and how all of these planets express themselves in that sign. Okay. So in particular, with Mercury in this sign, we see this, kind of this tendency of like, okay, well, here's what the rules are, and I don't like you breaking this particular rule, but I really think we should break this particular rule. Okay. With Venus there is less concern so much with like, cuddly interpersonal relationships, and more concerned with like, okay, what are your values? Do I have an interest in this other person, or do I wish to be in the company of this other person based on their values? Okay. And also based on my own sense of self-worth, and what is their sense of self-worth, and how are we expressing those things? Okay. So now when you bump Uranus up against that, we may see more disruptive communication, more communication that is more, don't tell me what to do. I'm trying to figure out a way to say this without cussing. Um, I'm not gonna do what you tell me to. And I am going to express myself in ways that you might find uncomfortable, but also that are liberating, that are concerned with with what I view to be true, and having integrity, and being really authentic. Okay. And then when you combine that with Venus, that communication is, it's concerned with the larger picture. What's going to be good for everybody? And at the same time, because there's that square with Uranus, we may have to have some uncomfortable conversations within our personal relationships as a result of this. Or there may be this, what? Our ideals, our values are not as aligned as we previously thought they were. Bye-bye. Okay. So, so that if our relationships are already on shaky ground, this is the time when they are likely to, be more likely to separate.
I would say to manage your own self and not micromanage others.
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely. And, finally, we see that sesquiquadrate with Juno. So a sesquiquadrate is a square and a half. Okay. And so it has some of the same tensions of the square. But it's like it's gone a little beyond what we see in terms of the conflict that we associate with the square, okay, which has a Mars nature, right? And the sesquiquadrate is like, yes, there's friction here, yes, there's conflict here, and we are better able perhaps to discharge some of that energy. Okay. So Juno, we see Juno is here in Capricorn. Okay. Saturn ruled. Okay. Concerned with reality and structure, and practicality, right? More internally based than Aquarius is. Okay. And Juno very much relates to, what are our relationships, but also, more importantly, what are our commitments, whether it is within individual relationships, or, and this has a big impact with regard to all this Aquarius stuff, our relationships with the rest of society. What are the kind of institutionalized relationships that we have? Okay, so marriage is the big obvious one. That is something that Juno governs. Okay, but she's really concerned about what how do those kinds of relationships keep the social order? Okay. So it's not just your marriage if you're married, it's, what is your relationship with your extended family, right? Your in-laws. Okay. What are the relationships that you have with key figures within your community, right? And what are the appearances that you keep up? Okay. And in Capricorn, then this is about um that's that kind of social order, but it's on a very pragmatic level. So it can be economically related, right? Um, what is the dynamic that you have with a boss or a business partner, for example? Okay. Um, and is it grounded? Is it stable? Well, not during this Uranus station, it's not. Okay. Um, unless it is something that is like been that you have a firm footing on to begin with, right? That's one of the things with Saturn ruled signs like Capricorn is, if you've already done the work, then the things that come in are less likely to disrupt you. Okay. Or if they disrupt you, it's more about like, they bring in a breath of the fresh air or they help you to see things in a different way. Right. As opposed to being something that pulls the rug out from underneath you. Okay. Um, but if you've been kind of, putting your fingers in your ears, la 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 la, I don't actually see these problems that are actually there. Well, now during a Uranus station, right, that is sesquiquadrate Juno, you're going to see those problems. Okay. And you are more likely to want to cut ties if, if you can't find some kind of balance between the relationship or the commitment that you've got versus what is liberating, what feels free, what feels um awakening. Like, do you want to spend your life like going, yeah, I'm comfortable here, but I'm forever asleep, right? Uranus is like, oh no, you don't. Okay. And so um if all you want is to stay for things to stay the same, and you're in for a rude awakening. But if on the other hand, you can, welcome some new perspective, say, hey, that that cupboard that was always there, I don't like it so much. It's not as big as what I need. I'm going to get something else. Okay. Sometimes it can be as simple as that. But in this case, it has to do with relationships. Okay. And commitments. What are our promises? And what is the social order? This all comes back to that. Okay. And right now we're in interesting times that disrupt the social order. And here we see the astrology is reflecting that.
Well, thank you. That was very informative. So we have a T square with Ceres square Juno and Jupiter. What do you think of that?
Uh, it's interesting. I mean, I just talked a lot about Juno, and Juno is the wife of Jupiter. And here they are at odds. Okay. And Ceres, then they're also both at odds with Ceres, like kind of even more so, right? Because, the opposition, it's like they're both looking at each other. They're going halt, right? Because an opposition is of the nature of Saturn. Okay. So they're both looking at each other going, not too thrilled with this right now. And Ceres is over here being like, hey, And they're like, both looking at her. Okay. So, um, so Jupiter can, relate to what is our faith, right? Um, Jupiter governs faith, not just religious or spiritual. He does govern those, but more importantly, hope, optimism, our sense that things can work out all right. Okay. He also relates to authority, to leadership. Okay. He's the king of the gods, right? In the Roman pantheon. And so, he's used to being the big man on campus. And Juno here is like, hey, wait a minute. Okay. Jupiter has a reputation for stepping out on his wife. And Juno has put up with lots of crap over the years because she believes in the value of their relationship, regardless of whether or not he's actually upholding that. Okay. But right now, Juno, who wants to have a good, solid, committed relationship, is looking at Jupiter. And Jupiter is kind of like, because Jupiter is in Cancer, Cancer is a self-protective sign. Okay. Domestic. Okay. Concerned with home, safety, family, but also emotional nurturance. Okay. So Jupiter's like, I just want to take care of how I feel right now. Right. Even if how I feel might not necessarily be, paying as much attention to my wife as I should. And Juno is like, but there are real practical things that we need to be tending to. Okay. And, I realize you just want to take care of your own feelings, but the work must still be done. And I think for a lot of people right now, that's kind of a big factor. There's things going on in the world that have people really in their feelings. And that have people, scared and concerned for their family and their home and their loved ones. Okay. And Jupiter, remember that whatever Jupiter touches, Jupiter makes bigger. Jupiter's the biggest planet in the solar system. Okay. He's big and boisterous and enthusiastic and a bit over the top. Okay. And that's great when we're feeling good things. But when we're feeling some kind of sucky things, then his bigness can become a big sense of self-protection. Okay. A big need for emotional security. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have emotional security. I want it. Okay. I'm sure lots of other people want it. Okay. But the work must still be done. Now, when I say the work must still be done, that doesn't automatically mean that we just, we must submit to, I gotta stay in this job I hate. Or, I've got to kowtow to the powers that be. Okay. There can be a tendency on the part of Capricorn to just kind of like put their head down and like, I'm going to like push through the work. And in the process, maybe ignore that the work is not actually the work that should be being done. Right. There's different kinds of work to be done. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Sometimes the work is, what's going to pay the bills and put the food on the table. Absolutely. And during difficult economic times, this interaction here between Juno and Jupiter on this cardinal axis of Capricorn and Cancer, it becomes, we really get into that almost like a feedback loop, right? I want safety and security, and I'm going to work hard for the safety and security and put my head down, and that's going to, give me an illusion of safety and security. but it's not really safety and security. That's the interesting thing about it, right? And here Ceres is saying to both of them, wait a minute. Ceres is in an interesting spot here. She's in Aries. Okay. And Ceres is, concerned with what nurtures and nourishes us. She is also associated with grief and loss. Okay. And of course, trying to take action to, get back what she's lost. Okay. And then, perhaps when we look at the myth of her, trying to get her daughter back from the underworld, and, all the powers that be are slated against her, she then has to kind of get insistent and put her foot down in a way that defies the social order. What does she do? She turns all the world to winter so that the people are starving, and Jupiter, or depending on whether you're looking at the Greek or the Roman version, Zeus, the king of the gods has to answer to her and has to try to come up with a solution to get her daughter back. Okay. And I think that this is one of the things that we're very much seeing in terms of how do we deal with what is broken in the social order right now. Ceres in Aries is not pussyfooting around. Okay, Aries is Mars ruled. It's action oriented, can be hasty, okay, can be impulsive, which is really interesting under the Uranus station, which can also, speed things up or make things hasty or impulsive. Now, Uranus is in Taurus, which is an earth sign. So we get more of a kind of seismic action as opposed to something more like flittery, right? Once Uranus gets into Gemini again, then things speed up like significantly. Okay. But even with Uranus in Taurus, you still get like more of this kind of tendency towards sudden movement. And Ceres, then under this Uranus station, Ceres being in a hasty sign, the ways in which she kind of, is confronting the social order, confronting our desire to hide in our homes, confronting our desire to just keep our head down and do the work, quote unquote. She's like, hey, there's some other things that you need to be paying attention to. And sometimes when we've got Ceres in Aries in this situation, sometimes that means that what is actually going to help us emotionally, what is actually going to create greater security, is not plodding along and keeping our head down or hiding away. It is taking the bold, decisive action. Okay.
Thank you. That was great. So we have a couple of minor grand trines. Chiron and Eris are sextile Hygeia, Mercury, Venus, and Uranus, Sedna are sextile Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto.
So that Uranus, Sedna, sextile Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto, I mean, that's part of the ongoing minor grand trine that's been, oh goodness, we've been in the thick of that to varying levels for what, a year and a half now, something like that. So that's ongoing. I do think it's really important for us to recognize Sedna's interaction here. Yeah, also with Pluto, we've got the trans-Neptunian object Aran, who is another underworld god, as Welsh underworld or otherworld god. Also hanging out with Sedna is the trans-Neptunian object Mors Somnus, which is a binary system, um, and, Pelion, I believe, is, who is a centaur, okay? Um, Mors Somnus is, um, named for it's a binary system named for the Roman gods of death and sleep, who are siblings, okay? Um, and so I find that very interesting, that combination there. Remember that I said that Sedna relates to this journey from victimization to power. Um, when you put her there with more Somnus, um, there is also that sense of, and especially with Uranus now reapplying to all of them, right? With this station, that's Uranus is going to be moving toward them. Um, there is this major emphasis on we have been sleeping. We've been sleeping. Wake up. Also, uh, that if we stay asleep, if we stay in our comfort zone, that is in fact with more somnus associated with death. Okay. To stay in our comfort zone now is to stagnate. And Uranus is all about, oh no, you don't, you're gonna wake up now. It's time to wake up and get moving. So that is the big background energy that has been going on and is going to be continuing to go on. Pelion in the mix. Pelion's a centaur. Centaurs add to the disruptive quality. That's really what it boils down to. Like there's certain centaurs like Chiron that are associated more with like health and healing and all that. We'll get to that in a moment. But the vast majority of the centaurs are disruptive. They are half man, half beast. Okay. And so they can relate to kind of like our wilder instinctual side. Okay. So that with all of those, these outer planets, these trans-Neptunian objects, these transpersonal forces are hanging out in the background in our going on in our subconscious. We are seeing them at work in the larger society. Okay. And against that background, then, our personal planets of Mercury, Venus are in this situation, they are interacting with Chiron and Eris and Aea. Aea is the daughter of Asclepius, this great healer figure in Greek mythology, and she is all about health and hygiene, but also can show us what is perhaps out of order that needs to be addressed before we can have good health and hygiene, right? And she is currently retrograde in Gemini. And so it's really important when she is in Gemini. Gemini gathers information. Gemini also disseminates that information, right? It's chit-chatty, gossipy, okay? And it's really easy for us to do a lot of doom scrolling now. Okay. Aea in Gemini, retrograde in Gemini, is that reminder to get out and touch some grass. Okay. Do something to stay grounded in the midst of processing lots of information. Okay. Mercury rules Gemini. So that's actually helpful here. Okay. But as is always the case, we do have to remember that just because an aspect is a harmonious aspect doesn't mean that the results of that harmony are necessarily what you want. Reason I say that is because trines, which are of the nature of Jupiter, increase flow between things. To give an example, I guess there's a massive sewage line break on the Potomac River, dumping millions of gallons of raw sewage into the river. Okay. Increased flow is not always a good thing. Okay. And in this case, from the ruler of Gemini to Aia retrograde in Gemini, there can be increased flow of information. Now, sometimes that's useful. Sometimes you need that information to stay awake and aware, but other times it can become overload. Okay. I do think that this is an aspect pattern that can have some of us overthinking, and maybe speaking in an overly hasty manner. Why do I say that? Well, because of the sextiles to Chiron and Eris. Now, remember Chiron, I mentioned. Chiron's a centaur, okay, so has that half man, half beast quality, but is the wisest of the centaurs, is this great teacher figure, was the teacher to heroes, and here he is in Aries, a sign associated with heroes. But what does Chiron do? Chiron shows us where we are deeply wounded and do not know how to heal that wound for ourselves. And it's important to remember with Chiron, especially Chiron in Aries, I think, but Chiron in general. Chiron was not wounded once, but twice, right? Chiron's second wound is the more famous, where he gets hit with an arrow dipped in Hydra's blood, which is, this incurable poison, but he's an immortal, so he can't die from it, so he's stuck with the pain. Right. But prior to that, he was rejected at birth by his mother and his father. He was the product of an affair. His mother was like, what is this thing I have given birth to? He did not look like her. He did not resemble her. She was like a nymph type figure, not a half man, half horse. Okay. And I don't know how to handle this creature, and I don't want it. Utterly rejected at birth. Okay. Now think about that. Being rejected for something that you yourself cannot control. Being rejected for who you are right from the start of life. Chiron in Aries, that is, we're in the U.S. Chiron return. Okay. And so there are lots of ways in which we're seeing this play out right now. We're seeing rejection of immigrants, rejection of people of color, being rejected for something that you cannot control, for who you are right from the start. Okay. We also see things like toxic masculinity. Okay. Toxic warrior behavior. We see, this narrative of, heroes who in fact do not look very heroic to the people who are being abused by them. Okay. So all of that is going on. And then what do we got? We got Chiron with Eris. And Eris likes to stir things up. Okay. She is, there are people who will call her a warrior goddess, but you will note she herself never does the actual fighting. So I do not consider that a warrior. Okay. That's more like a congressperson. Okay. That's somebody that is a quote unquote leader who is saying, go out and, stir things up. Okay. Go out and disrupt the order. And then she sits back and just enjoys the bloodlust, enjoys the nasty things that are happening. When you see that combination, then there is this profound woundedness that in turn is wounding others. Okay. Now put that in the context of this minor grand trine with Aia and Mercury and Venus. Okay. Venus in Aquarius wants to connect. And trine Aia, she most certainly, that's like, she wants to connect, and she wants to connect in a way that is healing. Right? We want to communicate with people. We want to connect with people. We want some measure of feeling safe and secure in our society by reassuring each other, right? And yet there's a whole lot of chatter going on that unfortunately is fed by and feeds into disruptive, and which may be unhealthy. Now, do consider sometimes the disruptiveness is, I'm not going to be quiet about what hurts because I've tried the nice way to get you to pay attention to what's hurting, that I cannot heal for myself, that I can only heal with the help of others. Now I have to be disruptive because y'all weren't listening. Okay, that we also see here. Okay, so what can we do about it? I mean, that's really the key thing, right? Key thing here, again, go touch some grass. I know that's like kind of a snarky modern day answer for things, but I do actually think it's really important for us to do some grounding, some getting in touch with how our bodies are feeling, because a huge amount of this is tied up in emotional dysregulation on the part of both perpetrators of abuse and the people being abused, right? And so we can't find ways to address the hurts if we're like running around with like chickens with our heads cut off, right? So we have to find ways to get more grounded, to, unplug when that's necessary. Okay. And at the same time, to make sure that we don't just like, hide our heads in the sand. We're not going to sit in ostrich, right? Especially with that T-square I was just talking about. Okay. We can't just ostrich. We have to do practical things in order to address some of the stuff that's going on. But we also have to engage in good self-care. We cannot solve the problems of society if we are not taking good care of ourselves. And so there's this balancing act that needs to happen. And at the same time, I really think that this minor grand trine is a reminder to get in community, okay? Connect with other people, do the networking that you need to, and recognize we are all dealing with hurts. Everybody has something that hurts. Everybody has something they don't know how to remedy for themselves. But if we put our heads together, maybe we can do some remedying for everybody. Okay?
That's great advice. I like that. Okay, now we're going to look at Hygeia or Haia. She stations direct on February 13th at 11:02 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And Hygeia is the daughter of Asclepius, about health, preventative health, and hygiene, is asteroid number 10, discovered in 1849, orbits the sun between Mars and Jupiter, and goes around the zodiac every 5.5 years approximately. Would you like to add anything, Simon?
So she's one of the quote unquote goddess asteroids. Okay. There's lots of things out in our solar system. There's lots of asteroids, lots of TNOs, trans-Neptunian objects, the centaurs, which, they have a orbital area that is, if I remember correctly, between Saturn and Neptune. Um, and so you might ask, like, okay, why are we paying attention to this one? There's so many things out there, right? But the goddess asteroids are among the larger asteroids. Okay. Um, and so, they're considered perhaps to have a bit more influence than all of the myriad other asteroids out there. Ceres, who we mentioned earlier, is actually considered kind of the mother of the asteroids. She's the biggest one, and a dwarf planet in her own right. Juno's another one of these large goddess asteroids. And so when we're looking at Aia, she's one of this group of, shall we say, more noticeable asteroids or minor planets.
And Hygeia stations direct again on February 13th. And in this chart for Seattle, she's in the 9th house in Gemini. And some aspects that she's making is a sextile to Chiron and Eris and a trine to the sun.
Yeah, I mean, I already talked extensively about the sextile with Chiron and Eris, right? The trine to the sun, effectively, the sun has stepped into the position that was occupied by Mercury and Venus at the time of the Uranus station. So now, instead of Mercury feeding into the intense flow of information that may be impacting our health and sanity. Okay. Because, definitely Aia in Gemini is going to relate a lot to mental health. Okay. And how that mental health in turn impacts our physical health. Right. But now trying the sun, with the sun stepping into that minor grand trine that we just talked about. Now the sun is bringing our awareness and our sense of purpose to the configuration. Okay. Our awareness of, our minds might need a little bit of help right now. Might need, we might need to do practical things to be able to address what is going on in our heads, all the information that we've been gathering, all of the information we've been bombarded with. Okay. And do actual healing work with it instead of just letting it rattle around in our brains. Right. Um, you know, uh, one of the things about chironic wounds is that they are often not things we can just go and like slap a band-aid on, right? They're things that we have to sit with for a while. That it's like when a friend tells you about something that is really, really difficult. Okay. And often our urge is to, I really want to help, I'm going to make suggestions. I'm going to try and fix this. And yet, chironic wounds are often not the ones we can so easily fix. Anyone who has sat there with like well-meaning friends who are like, well, did you try this? Yes, I tried that. Did you try this? Yes, I tried that. Okay. We'll recognize that experience. Okay. Is actually not so helpful. First, we have to sit with and fully see the wound. Sometimes the most important thing is for somebody to just be able to vent and say, I hate this. I don't know what to do about this. This is where I'm hurting. And for the person who is with them or people who are with them to, instead of trying to fix, say, I see you. That's what the sun does. It sees, right? I see you. Yes, let's talk about it, and you are shedding light on it so that I, in turn, understand what you're going through. Because maybe I didn't fully understand it before. Okay. So, you know, yes, we can relate that back to things like, the people who are going through really challenging situations with regard to immigration, or people who are going through challenging economic circumstances right now, people whose mental health has been, you know, hit hard, whether by recent events or prior events. Okay. Um, Speaking as somebody from, I'm like a lot of people these days, I have multiple chronic illnesses. Okay. And for a lot of people with chronic illnesses or with actual disabilities, those aren't always visible to people. You know, you don't always know, for example, why somebody has a what do you call it? One of those disabled placards in their car, right? They get out of the car and they're, not in a wheelchair, and you're like, why do they got that? Yeah, maybe today they're walking okay, but maybe some days they need to use a cane. You don't know until you actually are able to see, until you have it pointed out to you. Um, so I think that this combination on the day that IES Stations Direct is really going to emphasize, talking about what is hurting us and not immediately trying to fix it. First, just trying to get clarity. Just being willing to sit with uncomfortable things and look at them with, the sun is still in Aquarius at this point. So looking at them with um, that desire for things to be better for all concerned, right? It's a social impulse that we see with Aquarius. But also, an awareness of like things, a lot of our problems, whether individually or societally, are not quick fixes. And we need to be willing to go the distance, to spend some time with these things. And I think that's like one of the big frustrations that, a lot of people are having right now, that is reflected in that Chiron Eris combination is, you know, uh, we've been sitting and hurting for so long, and we want to do something about it right now. Okay. But those same problems are the ones that can't be immediately solved, can't just have Band-Aid put on them, you know? Can't even just like, have a splint in a sling and be okay. Okay? They're gonna take a lot more time. Um, so this combination, I think, is like a good first step for people to really see with clarity, and that yes, we do want to improve things over the long haul, but first we got to get a good look at it and just listen.
Such good advice. I really like that. So, and we already talked about this minor grand trine. Do you want to say anything else about it?
No, I've talked enough about it.
And then also, that's worth mentioning, on the same day, a few hours earlier, Saturn ingresses into the sign of Aries. It's been in
Yeah.
Pisces for the last 2.5 years, so that's like the first sign of the zodiac in a much different energy. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, as a stodgy Capricorn traditionalist, um, I view Saturn as the ruler of Aquarius. So the sun is in Aquarius at this time, and we have just talked about like that minor grand trine that is so Aquarius colored. Okay. Um, but also Saturn, really does relate to two key things here, our kind of fundamental sense of material reality, okay? And also our sense of what is hard, of what is difficult, okay? Both Saturn and Chiron can show us what we think is unfair, okay? And so I think that resonates, even though Saturn obviously is not anywhere near Chiron at this point, but has now entered the same sign, is co-present with Chiron. Okay. And so, in particular, I think that this emphasizes for us the challenges surrounding action because it's in Aries. But it is youngest sign. It is the beginning of the zodiac. And so, it's a new beginning for Saturn, a new beginning for how we see what is difficult in our lives, for how we see the challenges of material reality and what we want to do about it. Okay. And Saturn, of course, at this point is applying to that big fateful conjunction with Neptune that that so many astrologers have been talking about for so long, which is on February 20th, just 1 week after this ingress and this IES station. And so I do think it ties the IES station into that conjunction, because it basically has her stationing within that minor grand trine, having us concerned with how are we thinking about and talking about and working with our own mental health, and how is our communication, but also our hurt around our actions, how is that affecting us in terms of our health? And then that's that whole week leading up to that big old conjunction. So paying attention to what Aida tells us at the station is going to have an impact on how we handle the conjunction. Okay. So
Sounds wonderful.
I think, go on.
Sounds good. I like that they're leading into each other.
Yeah, I just think it's important for us to pay attention to this Saturn ingress happening on this same day, because it really does feel to me like it ties it all together.
Yeah, some other things happening in the background that if we don't pay attention, it's easy to miss.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to Mercury stationing retrograde on February 25th at 10:48 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on the 26th for Eastern Standard Time at 1:48 a.m. So you want to tell us a little bit about Mercury, please, Simon?
Sure. Mercury, as I said before, rules Gemini, also rules Virgo. Okay. When Mercury is retrograde, we are likely to redo things, review things, reorganize, reevaluate, rethink. Okay. Some key words for Mercury are communication, siblings, community, mind, learning. It's quick. Mercury, the element is called quicksilver, right? Intellect, reason, teaching, speaking, writing. Also, I'm a diehard gamer, so it should be noted Mercury is the god of gaming. Also, it's related to like short trips. So especially, doing any kind of travel around your neighborhood. Okay. Your commute also might relate to Mercury. Okay. And may be impacted under Mercury retrograde. Information technology, again, can be impacted with Mercury, because Mercury very much relates to information. Okay. Um, some of the cautions are confusion, information overload, or overthinking things, right? Deception of oneself or others, procrastination, being indecisive, fence sitting. Okay. Um, especially when you're feeling overloaded with information, it can be difficult to make a decision. Analysis paralysis is one of those things we see, especially associated with Virgo. Okay. So, yeah. Too many details makes it hard to see the whole picture.
And Mercury will station direct on March 20th at 12:33 p.m. Pacific time. And Mercury will stay in the sign of Pisces the entire time that it's retrograde, so from February 7th through April 16th. The pre-shadow phase period is February 12th through the 25th, and the post-shadow phase is February 25th through April 10th. And you want to tell us a little bit about Pisces, please?
Okay, so Pisces is a mutable sign. That means it's finishing energy, evolving, mediating, adapting. Um, the other modalities, uh, cardinal energy starts stuff, fixed energy continues it. Then the mutable is like doing that kind of fine tuning at the end. Okay. Um, uh, Pisces is traditionally ruled by Jupiter, and the modern day or transcendental ruler is considered to be Neptune. Um, Pisces is a water sign. Um, so it is associated with fluidity and with emotions, intuition, our subconscious, and our dreams. A mantra for Pisces is I imagine, so also is I believe. Some of the key words are dreamy, intuitive, spiritual, sensitive, mystic, compassionate, imaginative. Some of the cautions are being confused, nebulous, enmeshed, or escapist.
Thank you, Simon. And here's the astrology chart in Seattle for Mercury stations retrograde. Mercury will be at 22 degrees Pisces in 33 minutes, and in this chart, in the 5th house. And the aspects with Mercury are Mercury conjoins Venus, is sextile to Juno, and square Haia. So, do you want to speak to any of those?
So you will note here with that Mercury Venus conjunction, we've basically had Mercury and Venus kind of in cahoots throughout February. Um, and normally Mercury would race ahead of Venus, but because Mercury has been slowing to station, that's why they have been as close as they have been. Um, and so that conjunction with Venus has really colored a lot um, of February at this point, you know. Um, that emphasizes some of the perhaps the social consequences of the things we say, right? In Aquarius, it was definitely more concerned with, what benefits the group, what upholds the rules of society and or breaks them. Okay. But now in Pisces, because Pisces is more concerned with emotional matters, that definitely emphasizes conversations about feelings or conversations with feelings, and conversations within relationships, definitely. Um, Mercury is considered to be debilitated in Pisces. It is opposite from Mercury's, one of Mercury's 2 home signs, in this case, Virgo, okay, and squares off against Mercury's other home sign of Gemini, right? And so now we see, this Mercury station is squaring Aia, where it was previously within that minor grand trine with Aia, that we started out with. So here's the thing. When I say that Mercury is debilitated in Pisces, Mercury is in a place where Mercury is having to operate under rules that Mercury does not normally find very conducive to what it likes to do. Okay. So Mercury wants us to be able to be clear-headed and to think with speed and precision. Okay. To be able to manage lots of little details, especially in Virgo, and apply them practically. In Gemini, it's a kind of a sorting intelligence, excuse me, yes, no, on, off, good, bad, day, night. Okay. Whatever. Okay. It's just kind of like sifting through stuff. And then in Virgo, it applies that information. But in Pisces, Mercury is having to wade through the feelings, right? And also perhaps is getting information that doesn't have logical sources. Okay. So here is where we're going to see folks labeling whatever our Mercury comes up with, whatever our thoughts and communication comes up with, may get labeled as pseudoscience here. Okay. And so, for Mercury, that can be incredibly frustrating, that we want to think logically, or we want to do things in a precise way. We want to do things in a way that we can see clearly and understand rationally. And yet our minds are in this space where they can't do it that way. Now, that doesn't mean that Mercury in Pisces can't do good things. Okay. I would actually say it's got some interesting advantages tied up in its disadvantages. So, for example, one of the things that Mercury in Pisces can be associated with is because there is that intuitive and even psychic tendency within Pisces, Mercury can often get flooded with ideas that they're not certain of the source of, because those ideas belong to the others around them. Now, that can make us overly easily influenced by others who may or may not have our best interests at heart, but it also can make it so that we can, sense or predict, quote unquote, what others are thinking and what they're going to do, how they're going to strategize. One of the best card players I have ever met had Mercury in Pisces. Why? Because he could intuit what people across the table were doing. And remember, Mercury's a god of gaming.
Handy skill to have.
Exactly. Point being, I'm not expecting you to go to Vegas with this. This is not advice, okay, about how you're going to win the lottery or anything like that. But it pays for us to pay attention to what are the sources of our ideas now. Are they actually ours, or are we being influenced by others, and is that influence healthy for us? Going back to the square with Aia. Okay. And the thing is that when we can perhaps gain some clarity about that in turn can help us to reassess what are our social commitments with Juno, that's sextile to Juno. And, how are we contributing toward a kinder social order? Remember that Venus is exalted in Pisces. Okay. So Mercury, yes, Mercury is stationing retrograde and in detriment. And oh my goodness, the sky is falling kind of feeling with that, except here is this Venus who is exalted. And she's like, yes, let's have those feeling conversations. Yes, let's feel what it's like to be deeply connected with each other emotionally. Let's feel what it's like to have deep compassion for each other and to speak with compassion toward each other and to think compassionately. Because while Juno in Capricorn is concerned with what is pragmatic, the reality is that if we don't give a damn about each other, then our social order and our social structures are not going to be kind, and they are not worth lasting. And Juno wants what's going to last because she's in a Saturn ruled sign. Okay. So if we want to have a lasting social order, it needs to be one that benefits more than just a few people. It needs to be one that is compassionate, that is kindly, that is caring, that cares for the weakest, not just the strongest. Pisces is that sign that, loves the cute, fuzzy little animals and cares about every panhandler and, is concerned with those who have had difficulty helping themselves or who have been abused by the status quo and the powers that be. Pisces is very concerned with all of that. Pisces is like, we are all one. It is a universal consciousness. And so I think this particular Mercury station, especially in this combination, sextile Juno, conjoining Venus, square Aea, is very concerned with, are we taking care of our own? Are we taking care of our own being the whole of humanity? Or are we, going to just continue to screw over those who are, weaker or hurting, or especially those whose mental health is not feeling terribly sound at the moment, or whose economic situation is not so great? Okay. This Mercury stationing retrograde, yes, Mercury's in a disadvantaged position, and knowing what it's like to feel disadvantaged and at the same time being lifted up by somebody who is advantaged. And I think that it is an excellent quality to this. It puts us in other people's shoes. And puts other people in our shoes. And so the process of review that we will see with Mercury's retrograde, into March, is going to ask us to think about what we feel, think about our connections, and think about compassion, think about sympathy, empathy, being kind to others, and speaking more kindly, which I think we could use some of right now.
I like your perspective. That was great. Okay, we have some miscellaneous aspects with this Mercury retrograde. We have Ceres, Chiron, Eris, square Juno, and the sun is conjunct the North Node.
So of course, I've talked about Juno, I've talked about Ceres and Chiron and Eris. Now we've got Ceres and Chiron and Eris all hanging out together. Okay. And I think that that simultaneously increases our awareness of what hurts and grieves us, and at the same time, it increases our desire to do something about it. Um, and squaring off against Juno is like, okay, there are some big problems in the social order. There are big problems with the status quo. What can we do about them? Among other things, how can we stay committed, Juno, to feeding and nourishing and taking care of people? Okay. Ceres certainly nourishes emotionally, but also nourishes quite literally. Food. I think that food banks may experience some challenges under this. I think that food distribution in general, we may see some issues with our distribution systems at this time. At the same time, Juno, concerned with the social order, concerned with staying committed to making sure that people are fed. I think that this is actually, yes, it's challenging, but it's also good for those of us who are engaged in mutual aid networks, for those of us who are, for whom how we distribute food is, whether it's part of our actual day-to-day jobs or it's just an overall concern for us. This is a time when the issues surrounding that are more likely to come up. How do we feed the hungry? And in the process, how do we be a better society? Right? Because Juno is involved. The sun conjoining the North Node here in Pisces. Again, we've talked about Pisces, its sense of oneness and connectedness and compassion, the ability to intuit what is going on with not just ourselves, but with others, okay, with the larger web of life. And that includes non-human life, right? The sun conjoining the North Node here then brings awareness to the direction we're going. We can look at the North Node as simply as that, the direction we are going. We can certainly say that the nodes show our karmic arc, where we have been, where we are going to, what are the lessons that we are learning. What is our destiny? What is our fate? There is a fateful sense about the North Node. Okay. Austin Coppock has talked about this kind of haunted quality to the nodes. Okay. There's that awareness with them of not just our own individual karmic path, but especially with the North Node in Pisces, then all the people who have gone before us, and how has that shaped our karma, not just individually, but collectively. The North Node in Pisces, again, can put us in that space of knowing what it is like to be people who are disadvantaged. Now, does that mean we're fated to be miserable? No. It means, however, that when we've got the sun conjoining the North Node in Pisces, we now have more compassion, more feeling for people who are struggling. We have more of a sense of, there but for the grace of the gods go I, right? And more of a willingness to recognize the humanity of, or the value of, the life of, even if something is not human, right? Again, our cute fuzzy little animals, and even our not so fuzzy ones. Okay. Um, to see and feel ourselves within them and them in ourselves. Um, and that, among other things, suggests some deep feelings that can get brought up at this time. Okay. Pisces is somewhat stereotyped as being a bit weepy. Okay. We can feel what the Germans call Weltschmerz, which is effectively world sorrow. Okay. Um, I do find it interesting, this Mercury retrograde is coming on the heels of that big Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries. And so that's interesting because, like, those planets are getting this big new start, okay, that changes our larger vision of the world and changes how we are approaching our reality. Okay, it's this whole new cycle that hasn't been seen for thousands of years, right? Whole big new cycle. And what do we started out with? The reminder that we are all interconnected and that a lot of us are hurting. So that whatever it is that we start building with that Saturn Neptune, new Saturn Neptune cycle, it needs to be mindful of our interconnectedness and our compassion.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining the Astrology Star Sisters today. I want to thank Madam Simon for joining me today and all those that come back and watch at a future time. And Simon's going to tell about her Patreon page.
So, I do write about the transits on Patreon. It's I've gotten a lot more into discussing the trans-Neptunian objects and centaurs there. Um, it's definitely it's more focused on art that is associated with astrology, but I do a lot of writing about the astrology nonetheless. Um, so my patrons can expect a pretty much weekly, lengthy post on the astrology. I also um, sort of outline the transits that are happening with the TNOs in particular, because that's not something that's easily findable online for people. So I've gone digging into a lot more of that lately. I also do artwork based on the transits, based on like a single transit per week. Whether or not I finish a complete piece of artwork in 1 week or not is it's up to the gods, I guess. but I am regularly working on art and astrology over there and talking about it there. And there's a Discord channel for patrons to be able to ask questions if needed about what's going on. And I do create custom astrological art for my patrons, depending upon what tier of membership they have. So if that is something that is of interest to you, I would love to see you over there. Also, like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer and tarot reader. So if you're interested in scheduling a consultation with me, my website is iconalchemy.com.
Well, I've sure been enjoying hearing about the TNOs because I'm not very knowledgeable in that department. I know what they are, but I don't know anything about them. So I've really been enjoying hearing about that. So thanks for adding that.
Thank you.
I also have a newsletter, and you're watching my YouTube channel, and I have social networks, so I enjoy you subscribing and joining. I have a nice archive of shows on my channel that you can dig back in and look into things, and 1 to 3 shows coming out a week, so I enjoy you joining me. And I wanna thank our sponsor, Astro Peregrine Software, an astrology software for Mac and Windows, and you can find out more information at astroperegrine.com. Thank you, Madam Simon, for joining me today. I so appreciate it and look forward to having you back on the channel again soon. And I wanna thank all those that are watching live, and we're gonna say goodbye for now and see you next time.